Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of YouTube videos to help the viewers improve their chess game. A couple videos ago, I did a video called 2200, 17, 1200, or maybe it was the other way around. But in any case, I looked at a position, a random position I picked out from the eyes of a 1200 player, from a 1700 player, and then as best I can as a low-rated master, 2200 player. And that video was pretty popular. People like to see that. So I thought I'd try another one. And I'm using the Paris tournament from last year, and I'm picking out some random games. My birthday's coming up on the 8th of July, so I picked out game number 8 in the ICC library for Paris 19. So now we just have to find an interesting position from this game, Giri Anand, so we can analyze it. We don't want to do the first few moves. That's all just book stuff. We want to get to the point where the two armies are in a little bit of conflict. So we've got a Bogo Indian here. Okay, black gives up the bishop here, but he can get it right back if he wants. D5. I'm sure this is probably all book for these guys. So we're looking for a position with a little bit of tension in the position. So far, it's all kind of trading everything off. We might even have to use a different game. Who knows? Okay, we could look at this position, I guess. I don't know if it's a good one. It's not that complicated, but let's look at it through the eyes of a 1200. Black has just played rook to e7. Okay, so the material's even, and I have doubled rooks on the open file. I can move my knight and do something. I can't. If I move my knight to d7 and attack his queen, he'll just take me off. That doesn't work. I could, let's see, I could push my rook over and attack his queen, and that would hit the pawn on f7. Wow, that looks really good. Okay, rook f3, hit clock. All right, let's look at it from a 1700 player's eyes. All right, material is even. White has doubled rooks on the open file. His queen is on the same file with the king, same file with the king, the G file. If I could take advantage of his position, could I play something like knight f7 and remove the guard on the knight? Knight f7, king f7. His knight is guarded 3 times. I don't see I can add more pressure. I can play rook f3 and attack his queen. What would he do about that? That's pretty interesting. Let's see here. Where would he put his queen? He would play queen h3 maybe? That's interesting. Or he could counterattack my queen with rook to d4. That's complicated. Rook f3, rook d4. Rook takes f6, rook takes g4, knight takes g4, f takes g6, knight takes f6 check. That looks pretty good. Rook f3, what could he do? I don't see that he could do too much. He can't put the knight in the way, I don't think. If he plays queen h6, I should be able to take on f7. Well, maybe not. Rook f3, queen h6. If I play rook takes f7, he plays rook takes f7. And then if I play knight takes f7, he plays king takes f7. I can't play queen takes e6. Still, rook f3, queen h3 looks pretty good for me, even if I can't take on f7. Knight takes f7, rook takes f7, queen takes e6. Queen takes e6, rook takes e6. Rook takes f3 or something. Okay, well, rook f3 still looks like not a bad move. If he plays queen h6, my rook on e1's not guarded, but that looks pretty good. All right, I think I will play rook f3. Okay, so now let's look at it from my eyes. All right, so material's even. His queen is a little awkward. Let's look at that line with rook f3. Rook f3. If queen h6, then knight takes f7, rook takes f7, and now the knight is only guarded once, so I might be able to play rook takes e6. All right, let's look at that again. Rook f3, queen h6, knight takes f7, hits his queen with check. He doesn't have any checks. Rook takes f7. Then, if I play queen takes e6, he can play queen takes e6, rook takes e6, rook takes f3, king takes f3, rook to d2, and I'm up a pawn in a rook and pawn endgame with good winning chances, but not anything special. So I probably would take with the rook. So rook f3, queen h6, knight takes f7, rook takes f7, rook takes e6. What would he play there? If he plays rook takes f3, then rook takes h6 seems to win. Knight, rook f3, queen h6, knight takes f7. He doesn't have to take, but I am hitting his queen. Could he move his queen somewhere like queen d2 and hit my other rook? That's pretty complicated. Rook f3, queen h6, knight takes f7, queen d2. Queen d2. Well, my knight on f7 is hitting his rook on d1. So if worse comes to worse, I could then play knight takes d8. All right, so let's look again. Rook f3, queen h6. Does he have anything else? He could play queen takes e5, rook takes e5 and get a discovery on my rook, but that doesn't work. He could play h5, rook f3, h5, queen takes h5, knight f4 check. I don't think that works for him. No, it doesn't. Rook f3, h5, queen takes h5. I could even play rook f6, but probably not. All right, so rook f3, queen h6, knight f7, rook f7, rook f7, and well, no, we're looking at rook f3, queen h6, knight f7, rook f7, and then rook takes e6. If I play rook takes f7, king takes f7, as knight's guarded. So rook f3, queen h6, knight f7, rook f7, rook takes e6, hitting the queen. What would he play? Queen to d2 is no longer an idea. He could play g6, but then I'm up a pawn with a good position. Maybe even I have more in that position. It's looking pretty good. If you see a move that seems to win, don't play it. Make sure it's as good as you think it is. Rook f3. What else could he do? h5 counterattacks my queen. Rook d4 counterattacks the queen. Rook d4 seems to fail to rook takes f6. Rook takes g4. And now white could even play rook takes e6, and then when black recaptures, rook takes e6. So then my knight's pinned. I can't play knight takes g4. All right, so rook f3, rook d4, rook takes f6, rook takes g4, knight takes g4, f takes, g takes f6, knight takes f6 check. And I'm up a pawn, threatening knight d5. That's probably a winning position. The knight's pinned. Looks winning. Rook f3, rook d4, rook takes f6, rook takes g4, knight takes g4, g takes f6, knight takes f6 check. And king g7, knight d5, rook back to e8. Looks pretty good. Okay, so rook f6, rook f3, queen h6, knight takes f7. Could he play rook f8? No, I've got knight takes h6 check. I'm hitting his queen. We already looked at queen d2, knight takes d8, queen takes e1, knight takes e6. Got to be good for white. So rook f3, queen h6. What else could he play? On rook f3, the only candidate moves he can play are either move the queen, counterattack my queen. So rook f3, rook d4 we looked at, rook f3, h5 we looked at. He can't play queen to g6. So let's look at queen g5. Queen g5 looks logical. Rook f3, queen g5. What can I play? My queen is attacked, but it's guarded by the knight. Can I just trade queens and hit his rook in some way? Maybe not. So rook f3, queen g5 is probably safe for him. I don't have knight f7 because of queen takes g4. Rook f3, queen g5. What would I do? Queen takes g5, knight takes g5, hits my rook, and my other knight's pinned to the queen. So I don't think, maybe rook f3 is not the best move. Rook f3, queen g5. I can't play rook takes f7 because he plays queen takes g4, knight takes g4, and then takes on f7. All right, let's see. I mean, that doesn't make rook f3 a bad move. It just means, do I have something better? Now I could play h4 and threaten rook f3. If I play h4 and he plays rook d4, what would I do? h4, rook d4. I could play rook e4, but then he can hit that square with the knight sometimes. h4 is an interesting move. f4, not as good. h4 takes away the knight and the queen square, gives my king a little bit more air. If he plays rook d4, I can probably play rook e4. Then he plays queen takes e5. h4, rook d4, rook e4, queen e5. If I play rook takes e5, he plays rook takes g4, and I lose a piece. If I play rook takes d4, he could play just queen takes e1 for that matter. So it looks like h4, rook d4, rook e4 is no good. But what would I do then? h4, rook d4, I could play queen e2. He can't take on h4. I don't think that works. Knight f4 check. G takes f4 is complicated, but I think I'm safe there. h4, rook d4. I could stop rook d4 in its tracks by playing rook e4 first, but then he could just play a move like knight to g5, I think, and hit my rook. And if I play rook f4, that gets pretty complicated. Rook e4, knight g5, rook f4. Complicated. Rook e4 is a move. h4 threatens rook f3, but I'm not sure how to get at it. He's played rook e7, so he's either going to play rook on 8 to e8 or rook on 7 to d7. Can't play rook on 7 to d7 with my knight on e5 yet. So h4, rook d4. If worse comes to worse, I can move my queen back. Queen to e2 or queen to f3 maybe. Is there anything else I can do to take advantage of him? Let's look at rook f3 one more time. Rook f3, queen g5, I think is forced now, based on my earlier analysis. Queen takes g5, knight takes g5. I can't take on f7. I just have to move my rook back where it came from. What's the point of all that? Rook f3, queen g5, queen takes g5, knight takes g5, rook on 3 to e3. And it's basically I'm just giving him a tempo. I kind of don't like that. Can I stop him from playing rook d4? I could play knight f3. I mean, that's not bad. Takes the g5 and d4 squares away from his pieces a little bit. It does pin the knight. Not sure it threatens anything. Knight f3. I could then play h4 in some lines, I guess. I mean, that's a safe move, knight f3. my knight's pretty good on e5. I hate to move it back to f3 if I don't have to, but f3 is the better square for the rook if the queen couldn't go to g5. But we already saw that h4, rook d4 is not that wonderful for white. Doesn't look like white can do anything. Queen h4, rook d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight g4, hitting the queen and the rook. H4, rook d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight g4. Somehow that doesn't look good for me. If he plays rook e3, I have knight f6 check. That's okay. If he moves the queen, let's say he attacks my knight. So h4, rook d4, queen takes d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight g4. Let's say he plays queen to f5. Then I play rook takes e7, threatening mate on the back rank. Then he has queen f3 check. And if I play king to g1 or h3, he stops the mate. Can he stop the mate and win the knight? I'm not sure he can. So h4, rook d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight g4. How about queen f3 check, rook takes f3, rook takes e1. Does that come out even? h4, rook d4, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight g4, queen f3 check, rook takes f3, rook takes e1. Looks pretty equal. We each have a rook and a knight. Wow. I don't have to play queen takes d4, but it's an interesting move. So I'm pretty sure rook f3, queen g5 is not the best move for white. Huh. Knight f3 is kind of a chickeny move. h4 is more aggressive. I kind of like that move. The problem is I'm not sure it really works. Knight f3 might be better. But let's see what the computer says. If it was a game and I'm forced to choose, I guess maybe knight f3 is the safer move, but I kind of like playing h4. Let's ask Stockfish what's the best three moves here. All right, let's move it up. Analysis, start. All right, well, that makes me feel good that h4 is right near the top. And there's knight f3 coming in and out of number 3. We'll let him go up to 25 ply. So he's got rook d1. He's got queen e4. He's got h4 hanging in there at 27 ply. Rook d1. Right now, queen e4 is number 1. h4 is number 2. Knight f3, number 3. So rook f3 is not in the top 3. I'm not surprised. Okay, we need one more. Let's pick out one more position. We're at 18 minutes into the video. Let's pick out game number 18 in the library. So let's go now. Examine Paris 19% 18. All right, so we got the game Grishik against Anand. Let's find an interesting position and look at it through 3 eyes again. Okay, we got sort of a Catalan kind of position. Black now has a semi-Slav pawn structure. Knight h5 hitting the bishop. Bishop goes all the way back to c1. Black offers a draw by repeating the bishop. White says no thank you, develops the knight. Takes the pawn. Knight to g4, interesting move. Bishop f4, trying to overprotect the pawn. Now black could play g5 if he wants. And he does, trying to remove the guard. This should be interesting. White says, go ahead and take that pawn. Black says, I will. White says, well, your king is a little open, I have the pawn sack for that. Knight g6. Black says, let's keep some pieces around the king. White says, That diagonal looks weak. Black says, well, that's why I'm going to neutralize it. White says, let's play b4. I'd rather be black here. I think black's extra pawn is good. Rook c8. Knight e4. Trying to put pressure on the dark squares. Now bishop takes b2, queen takes b2. f5. Wow. Still like black here. White's got to move the knight. Knight d2. Queen e7. Rook ac1, e5. This is going to be more fun to do for black than white. Queen b3. All right, let's do black's move here. Let's flip the board. Okay. So white's last move is queen to b3. What are all the things that move does? Well, it puts a third attacker on that d5 square and puts the queen on the same line with the king. So let's do it as a 1200. 1200. The queen moves to b3. I can't win the queen. He's guarding his pawn on c4. I think maybe he's attacking my pawn on e4. I need to save that pawn. I need to like guard it or something. I could push it down the board and try to get a queen. d4 looks like a really good move. I could play that. Is there any other move that's better? Is that safe? It looks good. All right, I'll play d4, hit clock. All right, let's look at it as a 1700 player. 1700 player says, all right, he's attacking my d5 square 3 times. I've only got it guarded twice. If I do nothing, he plays c takes d, bishop takes d5 check, and he wins a pawn. Okay, so what should I do to save the pawn? I could play e4 to block the bishop. I could play d4 to save the pawn, but then he has a discovered check with c5, but that's probably something I could do, I could put up with. D5, C5 check, D4, C5 check. I could play, I'm up a pawn, I could just play Queen F7, that's probably safe. If he plays C takes B6, A takes B6, my C6 pawn is attacked twice and guarded twice, so I'm okay. So D4 is probably safe, E4 is probably safe, or I can move my rook over and guard the pawn. I could even take his pawn and let him play queen c4 check. I kind of like the idea of blocking his bishop out of the game with e4. And if he plays c takes d4, I play c takes d4. My bishop on b7 is guarding my pawn. He can't take on e4 because of my f pawn. And if he wants to keep trading off, my strong center should win. I have an extra pawn on the d file. So e4 is looking pretty good. Is there anything else he could do if I play e4? He can't take it. He can't play c5. If he takes on d5, I take back. If he then keeps attacking it by moving his knight, I can move my rook over and I can keep it guarding it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, I think I'm going to play e4, hit the clock. All right, let's look at it from my eyes as a 2200 player. My pawns are in wonderful shape here, and if I just guard them, they're controlling all the squares. The problem is, if I just guard them and he trades, he can trade off rooks and remove one of my guards. So for instance, if I play rook fd8, then c takes d5, c takes d5, rook takes on c8, and if my bishop takes, he has bishop takes d5 check, and if my rook takes on c8, he's got bishop takes d5 check. So playing rook fd8 doesn't quite work. Similarly, it's probably not right to play rook cd8 because after c takes d, I'm giving him the file just to passively guard my d pawn. And maybe he could double rooks and try to play rook c7 or something. So I don't think guarding the pawn with a rook is correct. But what does that leave? I could guard it with the queen. I could just take the pawn. Taking the pawn is not terrible, but I'd rather have the extra central majority than have the queenside majority. If I play d takes c4, queen takes c4 check, queen f7, that's certainly safe. But it's a little harder to win with that queenside majority with my c-pawn being a little bit backward there to his b4 pawn. So I think I'm better off playing something like e4 or d4. But I'm not sure. So let's look at each one of those. So e4, well, let's look at d4 first. d4, I'm sort of threading to play c5 almost, followed by e4 and f4, and run his pieces right off the board. So I think he would have to play c5 check to stop that. So d4, c5 check. Now my bishop on b7 is getting worse, and my c6 pawn is a target. So d4, c5 check. Do I want to trade queens there? Or do I want to just play king to g7? c5 check. Also, his knight can come up to c4 after that. That's a little annoying. I'd almost rather keep the pawn on d5 to stop the knight from going to c4. So let's look at e4. That has the extra benefit of letting my knight come into e5 in some lines. I think if I do that, he's going to want to blockade on the d4 square, possibly with the knight. So let's look at that. e4, c takes d4, c takes d4, and now maybe move the queen somewhere so that he can play knight b3, knight d4. So e4, c takes d4, c takes d4. How about queen a3? Queen a3, hitting my pawn. If I play a6, he can play knight b3. And then he's going to blockade with knight d4. But the queen on a3 is awkward and out of the game. So that's not really a big problem. e4 is certainly a good move. Can I ignore him in some way? I guess I could guard the pawn with the queen. Maybe I could hit the f2 square with something like f4 and f takes g3. So let's look at queen f7. Queen f7, if c takes d5, then c takes d5. If he plays knight f3, hitting my e pawn and my g pawn, I can always play h6. Queen f7, c takes d4, c takes d4. If rook takes c8, rook takes c8, I'm okay. Can he attack that pawn with another pawn like e4? Nope, doesn't look like it. Queen f7's looking pretty good. It keeps all the fluidity in the position. If he plays queen a3, can he play queen a4? Hitting my a pawn? I think I can always play a6. Queen f7, c takes d, c takes d, queen a3, and I could play like a6, and I don't see what he can do. How about queen a4? Queen f7, c takes d, c takes d, queen a4, a6. He can't go into c6. If he trades rooks, it doesn't help him. Can't go into d7. I kind of like queen f7, keeping an eye on the f2 square with the idea of playing f4 and f takes g3, and keeping the fluidity of all my pawns in the center. If I play e4, I think e4 and queen f7 are probably the best moves. I don't see that I can ignore his attack on d5, but e4 and queen f7 are safe moves. I think I'm doing okay there. Let's check with the computer and see what the top three are. Okay, Mr. Computer. Top three. Okay, I said e4, queen f7. It had queen f7 for a minute, and then it disappeared. Now he's saying I can ignore him with king g7, which is interesting. I didn't really look at king g7. e4 is hanging in at number 1. Guarding the pawn with rook c d8 to avoiding the rook trade is number 2, better than queen f7. So the move that I thought that queen f7 was better than rook c d8. Stockfish is telling me that I'm wrong, but it does agree that e4 is one of the 2 best moves, along with rook c d8. Queen f7, let's force queen f7 and see what he wants to do for black. He says queen f7 is not as good because of pawn takes, rook takes, and then knight f1. Well, hitting this pawn a third time with the rook. Now he's pushing it up. Now he's saying that, let's go with the top 1 move. Now he's saying either rook d8 or knight e7 leaves black with an advantage of about 0.7. Now it's down to let's back up to 0.7. All right, let's just call it 0.7. All right, so that's really wasn't that much worse. So the queen f7 is still reasonable. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Was our second 1200, 1700, 2200 video. If you enjoyed the video, you learned something, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit subscribe and tell your friends about it. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Bye.